Hey, Giuseppe, I brought you a new
Joe.
customer.
He's straight up, right?
Yes, sir, all the way. This here's Vito, my oldest friend. This is Giuseppe, the best safecracker in Empire Bay.
Retired, please. How are you? The papers for you?
Yeah, they are. You got them finished already?
It was a pain in the ass, but sure, they're done.
Well, thanks. This really gonna work?
Nobody from the army would bother you again, trust me.
You see? What'd I tell you? Here's the money. Take your papers, Vito.
The story for Mafia 2 has you playing as Vito Scaletta, a Sicilian immigrant who has just returned home from the US Army. Alongside Vito at almost all times is his best friend Joe, who helps Vito get acclimated to normal life while introducing him to key figures in the mob. As the story continues, you will see the relationship be tested as they go through different things that push them to their absolute limits. In my opinion, what makes this story better than Mafia 1 is that Vito goes through so many different things. While trying to make it in the organization, he has to deal with so many life events that turn every situation from bad to worse. And on top of that, these issues happen at the most inopportune times. Because of this timing, Vito is forced to make difficult choices that end up having dire consequences for not only him, but the ones he loves as well. Seeing these events take place made me sympathize with Vito, as you could see yourself or other people going through what he has to go through. To put it simply, it's not unrealistic to think that what happens to him could also happen to you. The events that take place are not placed conveniently just to make Vito's life harder, but instead they're real-life issues that almost every human can relate to. Instead of being centered around a war between two families, the spotlight on this story is always shined on Vito and Joe. No matter what issue is going on within a particular crime family, it's never about the family, it's about how the pair chooses to deal with the issue. Viewing the story from this perspective allows the player to judge other characters from afar and question why they make the decisions that they do. When Vito is offered different business opportunities, you can't help but question the motives of everyone that he interacts with. You already know that Vito is loyal to Joe, and because of that, you go into each situation wondering who you can truly trust. One theme that's present from beginning to end is that rules are rules. It doesn't matter who's your friend or what kind of relationship you've built, the rules of the Mafia always stand true. The rules themselves are bent and broken by various characters, and you see the effect that has on the story as a whole, as the decisions that people make are driven solely by the breaking of said rule, even though the relationship with that individual may be in good standing. Choosing who and what Vito remains loyal to is what makes his character so different than Tommy, as Vito is driven by his loyalty to Joe, while Tommy was more of a family man. In the end, Mafia 2 has a grounded and relatable story that sees two friends go through much hardship just for the sake of money. If you enjoyed Mafia 1's story, then I'm sure you'll enjoy this one as well. The gameplay for Mafia 2 is about the same as the first. Of course, if you played Mafia Definitive Edition, then you know that that game is a remake, so there's some subtle differences, but at its core, it's still about the same. Vito's movement isn't as slow as Tommy's, but it's still not that fast. When going behind cover and getting into cars, there's a bit of delay that can get annoying when you get into the later chapters. A nice addition is that Vito has unlimited sprint, so you can run as long as you want no matter the situation. Sadly, it's not as useful as you might think, since enemies can shoot you accurately from long range, making running useless since increasing the distance between yourself and the enemies doesn't do much. Just like before, each mission is divided up into chapters, where you would have to play and complete various objectives before moving on to the next. Within each chapter there's a lot to do, as the missions themselves are lengthy and require you to do a lot, instead of finishing something quick and then moving on. The biggest difference between the last game and this title is when it comes to mission structure, as this game is open world. As you're playing through a certain chapter, you have to go from point A to point B in order to continue the mission. But let's say you wanted to grab some new clothes or get a drink before driving to the next destination. Well, that's not an issue, as you could go right to that location before proceeding with the mission objective. Whereas in the last game, the free roaming chapters were completely separate. I loved how the symbols on the minimap represented the places you could visit. Wherever you wanted to go, you could open the map and find the symbol. Coming off a game where the open world was completely barren, this was deeply appreciated. There isn't a whole lot to do, but there's enough to keep you somewhat interested when not going through the main story missions. You could go into different bars and restaurants to order drinks or eat food that would increase your health if it was low. They had various options like coffee and alcoholic drinks, all giving you a slight boost so you could enter each mission without having to worry about your HP. At restaurants in Joe's apartment, you could eat food that would provide the same type of effects to your health, with the difference that the items at Joe's apartment were free. So if you were lacking in funds, you always had somewhere to go to heal up. Now, to buy all this stuff, you had money that you would earn from performing story missions, robbing stores, or delivering cars that would be impounded. By far the fastest and easiest way to earn money was by delivering the cars. It didn't matter where you got the car from or the condition the car was in, all you had to do was find a car, drop it off at the impound, and you got paid. This made it easy to buy weapons and other items to let you get prepared before starting the next mission. Speaking of weapons, there's various weapons you can use during combat that help you execute your enemies in a handful of satisfying ways. Obviously, there's handguns like pistols and revolvers that can be found on almost every enemy and serve as the easiest weapon to use during encounters, but there's more guns that prove useful depending on your playstyle. The Tommy gun, rifle, and grease gun all help you pick off mobsters from long range, allowing you to keep your distance instead of getting in too close. The bad thing about these long range weapons is that they aren't very accurate and the reticle shrinks only when you hit the enemy, with it expanding after each shot, making it hard to rip off a consecutive string of shots that hit the target. If you get your hands on the Tommy gun, my recommendation would be to keep that on you at all times, not only because it's automatic, but because it has a high damage output. No matter if you're shooting from close range or from far away, the Tommy gun can decimate many enemies all at once. The reload takes a bit too long, but if you keep an eye on your ammo, then you can foresee when you'll run out and make sure you're behind cover at all times. There are shotguns and throwables as well, with the shotguns not being as strong as I thought they would be. The throwables were grenades and molotovs, but they needed to be refined a bit. Their grenades will cause an explosion, but many times the area of effect was too small and the enemies by the grenade wouldn't be affected. The molotovs were a lot more useful, as by throwing them not only would they light the area on fire, if an enemy was even near the fire they would get burned as well. Unfortunately, this was the same for Vito as well. There's one mission in particular where you have to kill someone and that person does nothing but throw molotovs while you try to make your way up. So what's the best plan of action? Hide behind cover, right? Well, it's not that simple. Because the molotovs burn the objects which burn you, even if you're behind cover, you still take damage, even though you shouldn't. This made no sense and made the game harder than it needed to be, but luckily there wasn't many of these sections during the main missions. If you're the type of gamer like myself that likes to run and gun through combat encounters, you're not going to be able to in this game. You have plenty of life and it regenerates when taking damage, but the rate it decreases when you get shot makes you have to pay attention at all times. It doesn't matter if you're behind cover or wide open, when you get shot, you'll know it. The enemies have better aim than you may think, as there's many times where you're above or below them, but they'll still find a way to pick you apart. This brings me to the issue of AI, as the way that enemies respond isn't consistent, as sometimes they would run up and shoot me, while other times they're supposed to be shooting, and they stand there and do nothing. To make things worse, their animations were just off. When they would be behind cover, they wouldn't consistently pop out and try to shoot you, but instead shoot and go back in the cover, making you wait at least 10 seconds before they try and shoot again. This forces you to keep your eyes on all the enemies, because if you focus on one that is hiding behind cover for so long, the other enemies slowly move closer and will eventually shoot you because you weren't paying attention. Thankfully, you can see each enemy as they're represented by red triangles on the mini-map, but at all times you have to keep your eyes not only on the enemy, but on the map, to ensure that while you're killing one enemy, others aren't closing the distance on you at the same time. This wouldn't be a big deal if your health didn't deteriorate so fast, but since you can die after a couple shots, you really gotta be aware of your surroundings. If you didn't realize by now, you play as Vito the entire game, but for many of the missions you have Joe right by your side. To my surprise, Joe is a great partner as he provides solid cover and actually kills enemies to help you get through those long shootouts. What's even better is that Joe will shoot the enemies that get close to you, so if you do forget to pay attention, then there's a slight chance that Joe will save you when you're least expecting it. Since this is the definitive edition, there's some issues that make it a terrible port. As I just mentioned with Joe, when with other people sometimes they would get stuck in places or they wouldn't follow you as the game intends to happen. There's one mission in particular where you have to warn someone that they're about to be killed, and if you drive over there, the house completely bugs out. This was just one instance, but there's other times where the game doesn't function as it should. It could be bugs or missions ending due to things that weren't your fault, but the lack of polish on this port is noticeable right from the start. The graphics themselves look pretty good since this is a remaster, but everything else is scuffed. The atmosphere for Mafia 2 is great, and when not in combat, the game is just comfy. When you're driving from place to place, there's only a couple of radio stations you can listen to, and the music that plays can easily put you to sleep. The stations stay the same no matter which place you live in, but what does change is the environment, as it looks old and withered when Vito first returns home from the military, but after some time goes by, it looks a lot more vivid and lively. The city looks so much better when it's not dark and covered in snow, so when the weather finally clears up, it's much appreciated. Unfortunately, the driving in Mafia 2 is just as bad as Mafia 1. Again, it doesn't matter which car you're driving, the steering is terrible. Every time you turn a corner or go down a street, the car veers off to the side, causing you to crash into people, vehicles, and other buildings. What makes this issue worse is that the police force is always around and will try to find you for almost anything. If you're speeding down the street, the cops will chase you. Commit a crime, the cops will chase you. But what's most surprising is that if you accidentally run into a car with a person on the inside of it, they will still chase you. Because the driving is so bad, expect to have a lot of run-ins with the cops. But it's not all bad, as if the cops do corner you, there's an option for you to pay a fine, which would make them go away and allow you to get back to business. A nice mechanic that's overlooked due to how annoying the cops are in general. When going through each mission, there's Playboy magazines that can be found in almost any place throughout the game. These magazines are pretty easy to find, but the spots they're placed in are so obvious you can miss them entirely. They included the actual pictures themselves, so I won't be showing what the magazines had inside, but you could imagine the type of images that were present in each magazine. No real incentive to collect these unless you're trying to get the plat or all achievements. Overall, Mafia 2 is a game that did so much well and improved upon what was originally established in the first. Because the port itself is so bad, it hampers the gameplay experience and causes the game to run worse than it should. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game a 7. If you want to play this game, then I recommend playing the original Mafia 2 on PC or somewhere else. In my opinion, do not buy the definitive edition of the game, as it has a lot of issues that can ruin the immersion completely. Judging Mafia 2 on its own, the game is solid, and if you were a fan of the first Mafia, then you're definitely going to enjoy this one. What did you think of Mafia 2 Definitive Edition? Have you played this, or did you play the original game? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'm getting married, Vito.
Oh, Maron, that's great. I mean, it would have been nice if he asked my permission first, but hey, I'm happy for you.
Vito, you're in jail. Look at yourself. How'd you let this happen?
Hey, I already got a lecture from the judge, huh? I don't need another one. Just drop it, all right?